Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at the Open Source Leadership Summit for another episode of the New Stack Makers. I'm here with Kris Borchers. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Kris, tell us about what's happening with you in your life. What is going on right now? What is the significance of this event here?
This event is I think my favorite event of the year. Mm-hmm. Open Source Leadership Summit is, I think, even beyond the amazing content, I mean, just the networking, the folks that are here that are involved in open source, learning about open source, bringing open source to their businesses, and being able to talk to them and kind of tell my story and kind of help guide those folks is awesome. So, yeah.
What is your story?
So I am currently I work at the Linux Foundation, and I run the JS Foundation.
Great.
So supporting open source JavaScript.
Okay.
So, I mean, just a brief history. I come from software engineering. I was working at Red Hat for a couple of years, running some JavaScript efforts there in the mobile space, and then got involved in jQuery and started running the jQuery Foundation for a while, and then we, in October 2016, partnered with the Linux Foundation, relaunched it as the JS Foundation, and are supporting 28, I think, open source JavaScript projects now, and some of the most widely used JavaScript libraries out there. So
28.
Yes.
Wow. Tell me about how you got to 28.
Sure. So as the jQuery Foundation, it started out with jQuery.
Yeah.
And then some of those projects that came up around jQuery, so jQuery UI, jQuery Mobile, QUnit, testing framework, Sizzle, the CSS selector engine, those all were sort of the initial projects in the jQuery Foundation. We then, after a few years, actually brought in the Dojo Foundation. So Dojo is a part of the JS Foundation, and there were a number of projects there, so things like Lodash, which is the most dependent upon package on NPM. Mocha, the most widely used testing framework in JavaScript, and a number of other projects. And that got us to around 16, something like that. And we added a few more when we launched JS Foundation. So projects like Node-RED, which was originally built at IBM, and is a sort of flow-based programming tool for doing mapping data flows within your applications. JerryScript, a JavaScript engine for IoT devices that came out of Samsung, and some projects like that. And then over the last year and a half or so that we've been around, we've added a few more. So projects in the sort of UI component space with Marco, which is the project that is the UI component library that eBay uses on ebay.com, and Architect, which is a new project for provisioning and deploying serverless applications extremely easily. So basically what we're doing is just as the community, the ecosystem sort of surfaces these projects that are becoming important to that ecosystem, we look to support those projects.
Excellent. Now, we're entering this new era, and we hear discussions here at the keynote, for example, this morning about the state of the serverless ecosystem.
Yep.
We're hearing a lot about container-based infrastructure. There's a real fit with JavaScript with, in a development environment using container architectures.
Sure.
Right? So I'm curious, what are the values you're trying to uphold in face of not just this constant change, but constant change that you've seen through your whole career, right? What are those values you're trying to instill in those projects so they can be healthy, inclusive, like thriving places, that really are important, especially as we see such scaling growth in technologies from the infrastructure all the way up?
Yeah, for sure. So what we do when a project comes into the JS Foundation, we have what we call our mentorship program. And that mentorship is not necessarily technology focused. We're not telling them how to write code. We're not telling them how to make decisions within their project. what we're mentoring them on is that idea of being sustainable long term.
Who are you mentoring? Who are the people you're mentoring?
Well, so it's we mentor the projects.
So you'll mentor the leaders in the projects?
Yes. So the projects are self-governed,
right?
And so whoever are the sort of maintainers of the project are who we are mentoring, and part of that mentorship is actually increasing that maintainer base,
right?
And so what we do based on the experiences we've had is sort of give them guidelines and processes that they can follow. Not necessarily steadfast rules, but things that we've seen that work, and then based on the project, kind of help them decide what will work for them. But go ahead.
So they're self-governed models,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So it's really up to them to, to study the metrics and to study the composition of their community and different constituencies in the community.
Yeah, and we do. I mean, we help them with that
Yeah.
because we have the context. We can kind of take a step back and look at it from the outside and kind of say, well, maybe you didn't realize that all of these organizations are actually using your project. We should try to get them involved as well, and just help them sort of do things that will make the project more sustainable long term, like diversifying that maintainer base to not necessarily be dependent on one or two organizations, but branch that out so that when one of those organizations inevitably says we're moving on, it doesn't kill that project.
So that helps you understand the values of the organization. Now, the organization now is in we're 2018. We're kind of in the first quarter here. As you kind of run through the year and you're running through into 2019, what are some of the themes that you're going to be following? What's the direction of the community that you're anticipating and structuring your programs around?
Sure. So we have a pretty strong focus right now on a couple of, I guess, themes within JavaScript from the sort of application developer point of view, and that one of those is IoT, and specifically JavaScript and IoT. Mm-hmm. That's really starting to gain steam. We have a couple of IoT-focused projects, and really sort of highlighting that opportunity for organizations that are in the IoT space to tap into the sort of vast ecosystem that is JavaScript when they're looking for developers, and they don't have to hunt down that sort of unicorn C++ developer to work on their devices when you can put JavaScript on them now. And the other big one, like I mentioned before, is serverless. So we see that as kind of the model where things are going from an application developer point of view. And
so do you break down things by category to help understand help understand the projects too?
We do. I mean, at a high level, no. All of our projects are our projects. Right. But we do have, in terms of just the way that we talk about the projects, we'll kind of have these themes, but projects will usually cross themes.
Cross lots of cross themes.
But we do also have, we have some structures that we've just started kicking off kind of late last year around what we call domains, which is this sort of model that we're looking to start building where member organizations of the foundation can sort of group together and support maybe a subset of the projects more directly because it's a domain like IoT or serverless or whatever that they are focused on. And that seems to be resonating. We haven't kicked off the first domain yet, but
so how do you see proof then, of that serverless story that you've brought up a few times already?
So from an application developer point of view, we hear from app devs that that's how they want to build their applications. And so what we're trying to do then is give them the tools and sort of the ability to do that.
Why do they want to do that? Are they bent on building microservices? What is it?
So from what we've seen, it's really focused on the sort of quick iteration that you can do in serverless development and the sort of stability that it actually provides by architecting your applications in a way that when you think about them in terms of just a huge set of functions, now when you need to make a change, you're changing this one tiny piece at a time, and it helps sort of both iterate quickly and not break things too badly.
Right. You don't want to break things too badly. Yeah, that's an interesting question in itself. How do you break things not too badly?
Well, so when you're talking about functions, what's interesting is if you do change something and it breaks, it's much easier to just go back to what you had when it's just one small change.
We're looking at a prior state.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting development we're starting to see in the market with this issue around like developing kind of prior states of your platform.
Yep.
Which if you could deploy those prior states on a function kind of capability, that's where you start to see some real interest.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then how do you just, I'm curious on how you distinguish these platforms then, because if a container-based infrastructure is really as effective as it is, and and it's basically helping you build a platform for defining events, right? So how does event-based automation principles and practices fit in with the kind of the mission and goals of the JS Foundation? Is it just making that JavaScript, those libraries, richer and more, and more capable of, being able to be integrated into these IoT and these serverless type environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we tap into either new up and coming projects that we see capitalizing on those, or we see some of our projects starting to adopt some of those sort of event-based models and whatever. And then at the foundation, what we then promote is this sort of cross-pollination, collaboration amongst projects to share that knowledge, contribute to each other, and sort of help advance the whole.
So you need some tools. You need good tools for that.
And that's a number of our projects
because
are
I'm curious, like, what's been
tools.
the rate of increase in projects, like, over the past year?
So over the last year and a half, we've added 9, I think.
How many do you think you'll add over the next year?
So we don't.
I mean, what's the pattern? Year prior, year before that, like since like 2016.
So I would say prior to this past year and a half, it was really just one big chunk because it was the jQuery Foundation, and then we brought in a large chunk with the Dojo Foundation. But then over the last year, it's been about one every couple months. And really, it just comes down to if there's a project that is in need of what we can provide, both in terms of just practical things like infrastructure and legal support, to some of that guidance around long-term sustainability. And it's a project important to the ecosystem, we welcome them.
So, that's great. I think it just depends really on kind of the evolution of the ecosystem too.
Absolutely.
So, but jQuery seems like a milestone event.
Sure.
And that'll change the complexion of kind of what we see with the projects going forward.
Definitely.
Great. Kris, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.